So welcome everyone on today's webinar on getting started with Privado's privacy engineering platform. I'm Vaibhav. I also go by V. I'm the founder and CEO of Privado. On today's agenda are a couple of items. So before we go into the demo of Privado, we're going to talk about a couple of things. The first one is why there is such a huge problem when it comes to engineering and privacy. Why is there this gap? There are some fundamental aspects of how modern software development happens, because of which there are some unique privacy challenges as far as engineering is concerned. That's why you have a lot of technical privacy folks, privacy engineers, and legal privacy folks working closely with engineering teams. So we'll talk about what the gap is. Then we will dwell into the data mapping aspect for engineering, the foundation. Everyone needs it for GDPR, ROPA reports, CPR, ADSR, access reports as well. We will go into the challenges in today's static data map and how you can utilize Privado. We'll move to a quick demo on how Privado automates data mapping for engineering. We'll look at the results. I'll walk you through the developer use cases, your internal use cases as well. And then part 2 of the presentation is privacy by design. We'll go through real life use case of how you can embed a privacy code scanner in your SDLC, make privacy by design more programmatic, and then some sample use cases around how you can enable engineers, how can you reduce assessments, but still give engineers a guidance and help them ship fast with less privacy risk. That's kind of our mantra. So at Privado, we bridge the privacy engineering gap. We get privacy people and engineering folks on the same platform. And we do that by scanning your application code and finding privacy issues, helping you automate data mapping, giving you visibility much faster. Great. So I think the first kind of important thing to note as we go along the demo is looking at engineering and modern software development. And it has kind of some unique traits and capabilities on why it poses a lot of privacy challenges. So if you look at how software development changed, there was a time when everything was very planned. Getting resources like spinning up AWS machine was not possible, which means you had to create data center. Everything was on-prem and everything was controlled centrally, right? So there was an IT team which would provision machines, which would allow features, which means everything went through this planning exercise. Everything was waterfall. And we moved away from there to a point where now almost half of the organizations, based on a recent survey, 50% of companies actually ship software at least once a week. Right. And that brings us to the first big problem that modern software development poses is data processing. In fact, software development is distributed. It's distributed across teams. So you have small teams building small features or small components of a large product. You have multiple microservices. Netflix famously has more than 1,000 services. Uber has a complex microservice map. This is all available. If you just Google, you will see their complex service maps are available. So modern software development today is super distributed, which means as a privacy team, when you have to do a data mapping exercise, maybe for other departments, you can go to 2 or 3 leads and get an understanding. When it comes to engineering, there are these small teams. Sometimes they could be about 100 such teams in your organization or even more, who actually control the stack. So what resources they're using, is it on-prem database, is it relational database, what third parties they're using, the kind of data they're collecting, how long they're storing, so on and so forth. So the first big challenge we see in software development is data processing is distributed because software is distributed, teams are distributed, and hence you have this large challenge on getting visibility takes forever. And the second big pain point is, coming back to the first thing, is because now you have made everything distributed, the second software development is everything moves very fast. Engineering teams and DevOps team have built this tooling or pipelines in which they can pretty much find a bug and fix it within the same day and release it. Right. So now companies are in a mode where they are actually shipping features really fast. And that's a differentiator. If I have a feature coming in from our set of customers or potential prospects, if I can deliver it in the same week relative to my competition, I actually have an advantage. And engineering teams and DevOps team have built this pipeline where they can pretty much change these things on a weekly, on a daily basis as well, which means all the understanding you're building in this complex distributed software system changes every other week. So all the mapping which was done has pretty much changed. So that's another big problem. And the third big challenge is because of how two things: consumer expectation and regulator expectations. You have to make certain policy commitment. Either if you're a B2B company, you're signing a data protection agreement. If you're a B2C company, you're writing minimum privacy policy. As you do that, that's a very top-down governance framework that you have in terms of policies and contracts. But if you look at actual implementation, that happens via these small teams in the code, and there's no correlation between them. You don't have really any control on how software gets developed, but you have to still make these promises, right? So that makes situation where you have to either make aggressive promises which you can't hold, or if you have to make blanket promises, which again leads to some issues. So a combination of these three kind of problem leads to some interesting scenarios, some fines. But I like to see it like, if you are a privacy officer and if you're trying to write a privacy policy for a technology department or a software company, you kind of have to take kind of these two approaches, right? Either you can write a granular policy which your users will truly appreciate, right? So let's take an example. If you're a healthcare company and if you're saying that we will never share health data with any third party, that's a very, very granular policy. You've made a very good commitment. But if you don't have the visibility and collaboration then with engineering teams, then it could lead to fine and breaches, right? You could make a commitment, but you can't hold it true, and then that can lead to fine. On the other hand, you can still write a catch-all policy that we collect health data, we can share it with some service providers or some third parties as needed. And we've seen some of these broad policies, but that leads to loss of customer trust, right? Customers won't trust and share sensitive data with you because your policies are not written in a nice way. So I would say, like, as a privacy officer or as a privacy team, the fact that you can write a granular policy requires you to have great visibility and collaboration with your engineering team. And that's kind of a nirvana space. We're going to touch upon how you can reach that space. Typically, everyone starts with less visibility and less collaboration. But as you can move to a place where you have good visibility and collaboration and governance, you can actually write policies which or promises which you can make sure it's being hold true in your company as more software is written. Another flip side to this is, as you start to do that, let's say you start to interject early, you start to shift early at the design stage, and you're trying to do more assessments, more reviews to actually make sure the new software changes are compliant to your policies or adhering to the promises you have made. You kind of get to in these two scenarios, right? It's kind of like this false choice between speed and risk, right? Depending on where your organization are, you if you're risk averse, what you're doing is you're doing a lot of assessments, and that could lead to a place where your shipping speed goes down. Or alternatively, you could be a company which is okay with risk but is shipping very fast, in which case you have high risk, right? It's kind of usually companies in a scale lie anywhere in this graph, right? What we're going to talk today is also like you can utilize technologies like a privacy code scanner to reduce risk without reducing speed, right? So imagine wherever you are in this spectrum and however many assessments you're doing today to reduce risk, if you include an automated technology like a privacy code scanner, your speed of shipping does not go down, but your risk actually goes down because you can find things more automatically, something which is a technology is doing for you and not dependent on human input. So it's not that time consuming. So we'll come to this in the later slides as well. And kind of which brings us to the last point of the initial presentation on, like, if you look at the current privacy programs, and if you place them in from a data lifecycle perspective, data collection starts at the code, right? So if you are, let's say, an e-commerce company, you have a website, an app, a TV app, let's say, and then you have some backend component. All of that logic of data collection, sharing, processing starts is written in the code, which runs first as your website, then goes to your backend services, then gets shared, and then gets stored. Typically, companies today in their privacy program focus on, if they have automation, they focus on data discovery tools. That's basically at the last leg. So data has already entered your system, it's in your databases. And of course, you need to know that because you want to protect data, you want to also honor DSAR requests, so on and so forth. But the main problem is it's too late in the cycle. You're always catching up to things. You're always finding things post facto. You're always reacting to it. A flip side to it is a lot of data processing is happening in the code, and you want to catch that early. So A, you can prevent things from happening. B, you can assign privacy risk to a component, to a software component, which gets assigned to a team in your company, which gets assigned to a product in the company. So today in your company, you have a product, it has a security risk. You can do the same and get a privacy risk attached to a product and not to the data, because the data itself does not do anything. There is a code which pulls the data from your data store, sends the data to a third party. And that's a decision that an engineer or a product manager makes, writes in code. And that's, if you scan that, you can find it early, and you can also kind of scale your privacy program very easily. And then kind of tying all of this back to the premise of like a privacy program is to build a data map, right? And that's kind of the foundation, be it for generating ROPA reports or report to figure out where all to go when a DSA request comes in or a deletion request comes in, right? So if you look at the current way you do data mapping, and this pain point becomes very, very intense for engineering teams, because again, as I said, the number of teams that you have to interview is very, very large. And again, they're pressed for time. They've been asked to ship features very fast, which means you don't get the responses on time. So the first big bucket is like right now, if you use questionnaires or even if you scan data, you still don't know how it is used. So you have to still take this data discovery result and then go back to the database admin, and they will tell you the actual product owner to correlate how that gets used. So the current process is, even if it's data discovery or a manual or like an assessment sent via a tool like a OneTrust, it's all manual and time consuming. Imagine if you have thousands of engineers, you have to spend time, all of them have to spend time on that. And then the way you define your processing activity is pretty ad hoc. It's not how actually engineers are writing code. And that's where the biggest gap is we see is your data maps go out of date with how actually software is being written. So that's kind of the first big bucket. Manual, time consuming, takes a lot of time. The second thing is it's driven by tribal knowledge. It's driven by human input. It's driven by people's memory. So it's always going to be inaccurate and incomplete. Again, the biggest challenge I've seen is it's also missing. There's always this missing shared vocabulary, right? When you ask an engineer what personal data you're processing, they might be thinking PII or PHI or email. And, turns out they say they don't process personal data, but they have a lot of personal identifiers in there. So that's always like a big problem that we see when you're trying to rely on human input on determining your data maps. And finally, I think the biggest problem is these data maps are static, point in time, and they get out of date with every release. Again, like 50% of companies are shipping software at least once a week, which means most of your data map will get out of date, or half of your data map can potentially go out of date every week. And since they're not integrated into the development workflow, there's no correlation between, again, the code they're writing and the policies you have written in DPAs or privacy policy. So that's kind of the overarching challenges we've seen in the data mapping world for engineering, and that's what we solve for. The way we do that is essentially we have built a privacy code scanner. We connect with any source code that your engineers are writing. So think of it like on your front end, it could be a mobile app, a website, a TV app, a dashboard, a SaaS app. On the back end, it could be these software components like a service, a data pipeline, a machine learning model that your engineers are building. We connect to your source code management tool like GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, run a scan on all of them, and build this global view of data. What data your company collects, how does it come in your organization, where all it flows, which third parties, which databases, and all of that powers like a data map. Now, if you go through our cloud service, we can get it's up and running in 5 minutes. The first can come in the next 3 minutes. Within a day, you have the full data map. If you go with on-prem, that's a little bit more time, but it's still in days. It doesn't take months. It's not a 6 months or a yearly timeline. All of it, you within a matter of minutes or a day, you can get the actual data map for your engineering done automatically. And then this kind of like demonstrate like a full picture of what we accomplish with Privado. So any data store connection, any third-party SaaS app, any third-party mobile app, API logs, all of this flows, Privado is able to map automatically. I'm going to show you that in the next few minutes. But the interesting piece is we just need one integration. We just connect with your source code. That takes 5 to 10 minutes. And then we scan it and build all of this data map. Whereas traditional tools require connection with every tool, that every connection takes a week or a 2 week or engineering sprint. We like a technology like Privado, privacy code scanner does not need that. We can go live in 5 minutes and give you data flows for all of these apps, all of these data stores within minutes. And of course, once we do all of that, you get to Nirvana, which is data mapping automation. You have data maps which are automated and on demand. You don't have to ask any question, and you have your data map, one-click integration. You generate the data map from source of truth, which is the code, whereas the business logic is written. So you have that. And finally, it's dynamic and evergreen. Whenever your engineer pushes a new software change, automatically a scan is triggered, automatically the data maps are updated, automatically the engineers are given guidance in SDLC. So with Privado, you can go from a place where you might have out-of-date data maps, which takes forever to create, to a place where automatically we generate these data maps, which are complete, accurate, and are dynamic as well. With that, I'm going to go ahead and move to the demo. If there are any questions so far, feel free to put them in the Q&A. I can see there's already one question around difference between Privado and like a classic data discovery tool. And then there's one more. Probably I'll take that one and then move to the demo as well. So let's take one specific example, and I'm going to touch about that as well. Data sharing with third parties, right? A classic data discovery tool can only, first of all, you need to point them into the actual third parties you have for it to scan and tell you what exists in there. The second problem is it is limited by the connections that these third parties offer, which means if only 20 third parties today in the marketplace offer APIs, that those are the only 20 these data discovery tools can scan. Whereas in your code, as you can see, in Privado's dashboard, we already have about 50 third parties that we discovered in 17 repositories. And Privado can find and is able to find flows to all these 48. A classic data discovery tool maybe can scan 2 or 3. The most simple example is OpenAI. If you are a company who's integrated OpenAI into your products, you cannot scan OpenAI to figure out what data is going there. But Privado, because we can scan the code, we know what data your code is sending to OpenAI, and hence we can find that data flow. So I'm going to demonstrate all of that for you in the next few minutes and hope that answers the data discovery question as well. So if you look at the dashboard right now, what you see is overall the results that has come in from Privado. Again, none of what you're seeing is coming from a questionnaire. This was done in 5-minute integration, and the scan took another 10 minutes. And so from that, we've been able to discover some 40 data elements across 17 code repositories and 48 third-party integrations. We also created some privacy issues in these products that we scanned. I'm going to show you that very quickly. And yeah, there's some more information around overall risk score, third-party categorization, all of that. So let's start with the overall first view, which is, let's say if this was your organization and we would have run the scan on your organization, what you would get is, the first thing you get is out of the box, a list of data elements categorized into a data category with a sensitivity attached on what all data you have, right? Across all your products, what's the data you're collecting, sharing, storing, processing overall, right? So you can see like a large list of data elements that we have discovered. And let's say if there was some data element that you were worried about, let's say address, home address, and you want to know what's happening with home address, Privado builds a data flow diagram for that. So you can see addresses being shared with all of these third parties: Google Maps, Braintree Payments, Stripe, Telium, CoinGecko, Hedwig IT, is being stored in these databases, including some web storage, which is risky. I'll come to that. And there are some log files where you're writing address of a human, which can be risky as well. But the main interesting thing is, as you can see, all of this data flow for a specific data element is built automatically in Privado. And then, of course, let's say if you are worried about address going to, let's say, Telium, you can click here and it points you to a specific product in your company, which is sharing that. So you can go to that person and actually fix it as well. So this was one example. And of course, as we keep going in, email address, as you can see, the number of third parties is a lot. So if we build this, it's going to be like a very, very large data flow diagram. And the same thing you can do for a third party as well. So let's say, again, a typical question, let's say for a digital tracking we get is, we have some trackers on our website. We want to know what data is going there. There is no easy way to do it. Super simple in Privado. For example, Google Ad Mob, if you're utilizing, you just do a click. It shows you all the data element going in there. For example, gender, illness or medical condition, device ID. And if you click, it points you which product is sharing it. So you can actually fix it as well, right? So yeah, probably if you are in Washington, if you care about my health, my data, or if you're on the US side, health data sharing or sensitive data sharing with trackers is a big use case from your website, and a dashboard like this or a graph like this can help. This was more tracking, but it could be used for analytics as well. If you have integrated OpenAI, for example, you can see the same thing for OpenAI. For example, in this case, email address and SSN going to OpenAI. All of this is generated from Privado scan. It's not possible to scan OpenAI currently, but with Privado, you can do that. And the same thing is true for databases, APIs as well. So this was what we were looking at from a larger view, which is you go into an organization, run the first few scans, and you get the data map. You get the overall picture of what data you have, where it is flowing, where it is being stored, so on and so forth. But then sometimes you also want to go into and have a look on a specific product. So for example, I'm going to take two kind of products today, a backend component, which is like a accounts service, identity service. And I'm going to also use an example of a front-end website. So yeah, that's kind of the first of it. So let's try to look at Privado Accounts API. This is kind of like think of it as like a backend service. So this is something which is anything whenever a customer tries to sign up, this is a backend component which will be called to register a user to sign up, things of that nature, right? So you'll have a lot of these components in your organization. So this is a specific scan of that. So here what you can see is we have discovered some 8 data elements, 7 data inventory, and this is kind of the data flow diagram for that. So as you can see, data is being stored in a database, is being shared with some third parties like Slack and SendGrid, and there are some collection points for that where data is coming in from. Moving on, another cool feature that you can utilize in Privado is something called processing activity discovery. So what we do is we, again, bridge the gap between privacy and engineering teams. We scan the code to extract these processing activities, which can then go into your ROPA report. So for example, here, what this service is doing is basically managing the user's account. So as you can see, the name of the processing activity is user account management and notification. And the second one is user logging, right? And it gives you a description. So even if these applications or engineering applications are not familiar, you can use the processing activity functionality to figure out what the application is actually doing. These are processes or purposes as well for you. And then you can dig deep and you can say, okay, I want to figure out what's happening with the email address. It builds a nice data flow, again, data flow diagram for you saying email address is being shared with SendGrid, Slack, user accounts, so on and so forth. Now, this is a picture that's super useful for privacy teams. One of the main things, as I said, we help you collaborate with engineering in a very easy way. The other flip side to it is a code analysis tab. So here what we do is we give you line by line proof of each flow. So when you're talking to your engineers, they can actually see in the line of code where we tagged something as email or how the exact flow happened. So for example, when we say email is going to Slack, and let's say that's a problem, it has a line by line proof where email gets transformed across the way and gets logged as somewhere as message. And this, when you share this thing with your engineer, they see exactly why we are saying something is a privacy issue or a privacy finding. And this makes your life easier because when you come to the platform, you see these nice data flow diagrams, which you can use. But when an engineer see, they see line of code. So we can bridge this language translation between privacy and engineering teams as well. So this was one example. Again, you can look it for multiple data elements of phone number, or in an inventory perspective, what's going into SendGrid, very easy to answer. So this was kind of the first part, which was, again, we scan, we build your data inventory, we extract processing activities and automate your initial data map. This can go into generating things like RUPA reports, DPIs, and other things as well. So this was one example. I'll take another example, which is a front-end app. So think of this like a website. So if you have a website with trackers, cookies being deployed, this is an example of that. So in this case, you will see the data flow diagram looks slightly differently. There are some third parties, there are some cookies which were discovered, there are some collection points which were discovered. And as we go in, you will see the data flow looking slightly differently. So maybe let's focus on social security number since it's super sensitive. And you will see not only you will see like data being shared here, you'll also see the actual user form. So there's like a form for checkout page where you're collecting social security number, and then it's going to things like Datadog, Hedwig, and some other APIs as well. So yeah, again, depending on the kind of product, we cover the full data lifecycle, be it a user form, user permission, data sharing with third parties, data storing in databases, data transformation, all of that as well. And yeah, just again, as I said, everything has the line of proof. So for example, when we said you're collecting social security number, here is exactly where you're collecting it. So you have line by line proof as well of everything in Privado. Again, if you are concerned about digital tracking, we can find pixels as well. So for example, Google Tag Manager, and there is a corresponding flow for that. Hedwig.com has some data going in there, right? So any pixel, any third-party integration on your front-end websites or your back-end website is fully covered by Privado as well. So yeah, these were some examples where Privado has been able to scan code repositories, your applications, both front end, back end, and build these data maps out of it. And again, like the core use case is here. Once we do this, we can send like a ROPA assessment, which is probably about 70 to 80% pre-filled. And you can utilize that to complete the report. You can attach things like legal basis to generate a full-fledged ROPA report as well. Perfect. So that was kind of like the first half of the presentation where we were focusing more around the data mapping aspect of Privado. I'll move back to the presentation and talk about the second part, which is always interesting to see, is privacy by design, right? And you can either think it from a privacy by design perspective, you can also think it from a privacy assurance, governance, or monitoring perspective. What you want is essentially, as new software gets developed, as new features get developed, as new changes are pushed, can you ensure there are no privacy issues in that? Can you ensure the promises you made either as a DP, either as part of a data protection agreement, or let's say your privacy policy, the new changes should not violate those promises, right? And then finally, there are some ops things, right? So if someone adds a database, you want to make sure it's part of your DSAR API, right? So, or if someone adds a new third party, you need to sign a DPA. So there are some privacy operations thing you want to do. There are some privacy issues you want to avoid, and you want to ensure your promises are adhered. So that's kind of privacy by design, privacy governance, privacy assurance program. And what Privado enables you to do it is to make it more programmatic. We do it, and the next slide kind of covers it by making it continuous, helping you prevent things from going live, and then making things more dynamic, more real time. So this is kind of a good example of a typical privacy by design process, right? If typically like companies would have like something like a Jira where they have new tickets being created, and then they will have something like an intake process where they will ask, do you process personal data, or does this new feature involve personal data? If someone says yes, then a new PI is created, PI is filled, and then what you hope is the PI, DPI, privacy review done at the design stage is adhered in the code stage as well. What you can utilize Privado for, and this kind of like a sample use case, is if you look at the blue line here, what we do is whenever an engineer pushes a new code, we rerun a scan, and then what we do is we check drift. So we check drift from a couple of things. We look at if there was an existing privacy review done or an existing documentation in form of ROPA report. We'll take that and compare the new change and see if there was a drift or a change from that baseline. If there was nothing, you keep the PIS closed, nothing happens. If there was a change and it was a minor change, which means, let's say you had already covered most of the things, and let's say someone tries to add a new cookie. So you don't want to do an assessment for that. So we can provide a guidance directly there. So you don't need to do an assessment for that. So depending on the severity of the change, we can reopen a PIA, or let's say if a PIA was never done, we can open it for the first time. And if it was a minor change, you don't want to do an assessment for that, you can just give the guidance directly in Privado. I'll show you how those policies are set up and how you can do that. So adding this, again, going back to the point of wherever you are in the graph of speed and risk, however many assessments you're doing, if you implement a strategy of a privacy code scanning solution like Privado, what it will allow you to do is catch things that you did not catch, validate your assessments, and also do it in such a way that you don't have to do assessments again, but give engineers the guidance directly where they are spending most of their time, which is GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket. And finally, on engineering enablement and just-in-time guidance for engineering, here is some examples of policies that you can take back home, and probably like things like these you can set up in Privado as well. So let's take some examples where you don't need to do an assessment, but you can directly give a privacy engineering guidance, right? So let's say someone adds a first-party cookie, right? So this is something from your website team. Again, this is not in your marketing team, so you don't really know which engineer added it. But whenever someone adds a cookie, what Privado can enable you to do is automatically detect that and give a guidance saying, hey, onboard this new cookie to our CMP before this goes live. Make sure the expiry is less than 1 year. That's one example. Probably like looks like a very simple example, but I've seen a lot of first-party cookies don't adhere to the CMP because no one tells the privacy team. And it's very tough to track who actually added that cookie or who should you talk to in the front-end team. Let's take another example. On your backend team, someone adds a new data table, a new database. You definitely want to make sure it's onboarded to your DSAR service or deletion service. You want to make sure retention schedule is applied. You want to make sure if user inactivity is there, it leads to deletion. So imagine whenever Privado detects it, we give this guidance to engineers directly. Again, you don't need to do an assessment for this. We can give that guidance automatically. Another one, this is linked to digital tracking governance specifically. Imagine whenever someone adds a pixel or a new data flow goes to an existing ad third party, we can give guidance on data deletion, signing third party DPA. And finally, let's say if there's someone is collecting data for the first time, let's say date of birth or location, you can give them guidance to use age or year of birth instead of date of birth, or give them guidance to use coarse location instead of precise location, right? So the core concept, again, going back here, is you can leverage a privacy code scanning in your privacy by design or privacy governance approach, where things can become more lightweight, things can become more automatic. And right now, as you work in your company, whenever a new code change happens, there are at least 3 to 4 security scanners which run. Think of a privacy code scan as your assurance tool, which is running next to these security scans and giving engineers guidance on how to do privacy well. With that, I'm going to move with the next part of the presentation, which is showing you actually how you can configure these policies, etc. I can see there's one question around how can Privado help with AI governance. So yeah, think of AI governance. There will be 2, 3 things. So I'll take one example, which is if you are using third-party tools, which could be things like OpenAI, Anthropic, Bard, or even open source models in your application, Privado can detect the use of that. So first of all, catalog which actual application use AI, third party or your own models. Second, what data actually flows to those. So if you were supposed to send only text messages or prompts, does your prompt contain email address as well to OpenAI or your own model or not? So what data actually goes into these models? One. And second is, of course, which application use AI and for what reason. That entire reasoning Privado can scan and detect and show you. So that's how we can help with AI governance as well. And probably that's like a shorter answer. We can do another full session on how we help in AI governance as well. Perfect. So with that, let me move to the second part of the presentation, which is demo on the privacy by design aspect, right? So the first part we looked at, the visibility part, is in which was how quickly you can go in and build your initial data maps, see what's happening with data. And ideally, when you do that, it should open some privacy issues for you. I'm assuming you go in a company which inherits some privacy debt. You're sharing more data, you don't know about some third parties, or you're over processing data. It happens with every company. So what the first thing you can do in Privado is to find gaps in your product, find privacy issues in your product which exist today with no change, right? So for that, we have this concept of policies. Think of policies as we give you an out of the box policy for most of the things, but we can also translate your existing contracts. They become policies automatically, like DPAs, or you can also give your own privacy policy to create these policies in Privado. We can scan them, automatically create them. But here are some example of that. So for example, let's say if you're a healthcare company, for you, health data sharing is a problem. You want to make sure you don't share health data with any third party. This is one example of that. So this policy will catch that issue. Another example is, let's say if you are operating in California, you want to make sure you have a do not sell or share policies. And you can, for example, say, let's say if in your privacy notice you've shared that you're not sharing any data category, then this policy is an example for that. This is a policy which is going to find any issue which violates this. Um, or it could be things like standard policies like insecure sensitive data storage. So if in your web app you're sharing secrets or credit card numbers in plain text, that is something that Privado will find and report as an issue as well. Another interesting one is linked to privacy by design. So whenever a new third party gets found in Privado, we kick this policy up, we create an issue for that as well. So you have kind of multiple kind of policies in Privado. They mimic your promises either in a DPA, either in a privacy policy, or we also have out of the box GDPR related policies that we're looking for. Sensitive data sharing, sensitive data logging, new data element added, new third party element added, things like that. So once you have these policies, these are actual engineering guidance that we have written. What we do is we correlate the scan, look at the policy, and then create issues for it. So here is the issues tab in Privado. Here you can see different issues that we detected which violated your existing policies. So for example, let's look at the first policy, which is deny health information sharing, which is if you're a health company, you don't want health data to go to any third party. And here is an example of an issue. So it says we detected illness or medical condition is being shared with Google AdMob. And this is something which is completely not okay. And this is a privacy gap which exists in your product. It's linked to a specific repository, a team inside your organization. And what you're trying to do here is, once you have this issue, now here's the good part. You have a line by line proof, and we have a Jira integration. So you can basically click here and send this issue to Jira, assign it to the engineer automatically. So when you start in Privado, not only you get the initial visibility in your data map, but you also get a product by product gap. Every product might have some privacy issue, which is violating your policy. We give you that insight, and then we make it very easy for you to send it to engineers automatically. This was one example when we detected health information being shared. Another example is where sensitive data like payment mode was being stored in web local storage. Now, this is prone to cross-site scripting. It's a security problem as well. It's kind of insecure storage of sensitive data. So that's another thing that Privado has picked up. You can send it to Jira. Let's look at some other examples as well. Sensitive sharing. So in this case, what's happening is social security number is being shared with OpenAI. This is something that you don't want it to happen, right? I mean, that was a part of AI governance as well. So that's another example. So all in all, as we keep scanning your code repositories, as we keep scanning data or code for your product, for each product, you get the number of issues, high, medium, low. And basically, this is building that risk threat for each of your product, which you can report up. Ideally, once you finish the scan, not only you generate your ROPA reports in your data map, you also start fixing these issues which already exist in your product. So this basically helps you get to a more compliant stage, a stage where you are respecting your users' promises. I'm going to take a pause, and there are a bunch of questions. I'm going to answer that as well. Are there any provisions for exceptions and ability to require? For sure. So the next question was about, okay, this is perfect, and you're able to tell us the gaps which exist live. What about real-time monitoring? You know, when things are breaking, right? So I'm going to actually do that right away. So I'm going to take two products. I'm going to act like an engineer, and I'm going to push some new code and show you what happens when an engineer does that, which involves some privacy issue and what the entire workflow as well. So let me do that. Let me quickly go to this code repository and explain what I'm going to do. So here is a list of third parties that exist in this web app called Raccoon. There is no TikTok pixel added here right now. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to edit this code like an engineer does. Imagine like a product manager asks the engineer that, hey, please include TikTok pixel in our web app. We want to send user data to them so we can target them later in TikTok. And this is a script for TikTok or pixel. This is the script for TikTok pixel I added. I'm going to make it live and show you what happens in Privado. So this is something called a pull request. Engineers do it so other engineers can look at the code before it is shipped live. So we're going to follow the same process, what your engineers are doing, and just do the same thing. Whenever this happens, whenever an engineer pushes a new code, what happens in Privado is a Privado scan start. As you can see, what I've done is I've added a code to say add TikTok pixel, and a Privado scan initiates. Now, this is the control monitoring part of Privado, wherein not only you see gaps in your current product, but this scan allows you to prevent things from going live. So whenever an engineer has made a new change, we will find it and report it to the engineer and prevent that from going live as well. Can you leverage and update GDPR policies? Yes, exactly. So yeah, we actually have out of the box policies for GDPR, and we can also look at your internal interpretation of that and then basically convert them into our policies, which is going to monitor these code changes as well. So that's 100% possible. Now let's see this one more question on setup. So yeah, while the scan is running, from a setup perspective, I think that's one thing which is an advantage in a privacy code scanner is generally data discovery tool take anywhere from 3, 6, 12 months because you have to do integration after integration. Code scanning tool like art can go live in a matter of 5 to 10 minutes to a day, depending on which format you choose. And then you have the results on your hand as well. Okay, let's look at the next question. Let me finish this. Okay, awesome. So there's one more question on support in terms of languages. But before I do that, let me just show you what happened. So again, as an engineer, I added a new code for TikTok pixel. And what we did was we said, hey, there is a new privacy issue that we discovered. You have added a new third party called TikTok. Now, here was a place where we could have given them guidance on what to do, what not to do, all of that. But the main insight here is for the first time, you have actually control in SDLC. if engineers are or product people are building products or features which are against your privacy policies, you get control. You can stop them, you can give them guidance. You don't need to do an assessment for that. You can just give them the guidance here. For example, let's say if someone is adding TikTok, you want them to be onboarded to your OneTrust CMP or whatever CMP you use, you can do that. So this makes privacy continuous. This gives you ability to monitor things, stop them from going live, and make your privacy by design program fully programmatic as well. So this was one example. And again, you can take this argument all the way through to anything. You can say, hey, can Privado detect new data elements being added? Yes. Can we detect new data flows? Yes. Can, if someone violates any of our existing policy? Yes. All of that new things which are happening, will your engineers will push a new code. We will find issues, give engineers the guidance. They will fix that before it goes live, and you will have less issues in Privado. Okay, I have a bunch of more questions coming up. Okay, yeah, so that's a great question. So what do we do in terms of giving trust to the organization who are buying Privado? So a couple of things. So one is, of course, from a security perspective, we are SOC 2 Type 2 certified. We have both on-prem and cloud solution, depending on how companies have configured, which means your code can 100% stay within your environment. We don't see anything as well. So that's an option available as well. We do have a privacy engineering team as well, which works very closely with our customers to translate their policy into engineering guidance. We work with the industry as well. This is part of a demo webinar, but if you've been following, we run a privacy engineering community. We work with technical privacy leaders in the industry as well, to keep refining our product, and then also keep listening to what is the need of the market as well. So we have, from a security perspective, things we have architected in a on-prem and a cloud manner. We have privacy engineers inside our company as well, and then we have a community that we tap into as well. Okay, there was, do you update the policy? Okay, yeah, but good question, Naomi. Yes, we do that. So if the regulations change, these policies update as well. So we have, again, as I said, we have a privacy engineering team which works on these out of the box policies. They are updated automatically. Also, if you are signing contracts, we can scan them, and those are real time. Those policies are created based on that. Or we can scan your privacy policy and create a policy automatically. That will be real time as well. So there's a question, how do we do code scanning for privacy better than other code scanning options, even now in Gen AI? Okay, perfect. So that's a little, Mike, that's a little bit more technical question in terms of how the technology works. The short answer to that is, actually our code scanner is open source. So yeah, for people on the technical side, if they want to test out, they can fully, I mean, so you can see how the technology works. But what Privado does, think of it as like we build like a map, a Google map of your application, right? In which we connect everything, all your variables, all your data ingestion points, data egress points. So which means your user form, permission, APIs, third parties, databases. So we build this Google map of your application, and then we are asking a privacy question, right? A security scanner will ask a security question. We are asking a privacy question of, given this map, mark all data points which are personal data and show me where all they come from in this application and where all they go. Now, GenAI, from a GenAI perspective, what we also leverage GenAI and large language models, of course, for doing better tagging, but the core technology is building this Google map, which we've done really, really well. So yeah, that's a short answer to your question, Mike. We can always take this question offline, and if you, also, like, we can bring in some engineers to help debate and discuss about GenAI plus overall code scanning. It's just not privacy code scanning, but security code scanning as well. But yeah, that's kind of like what we do, build like a Google map for your engineering systems. And by the way, thanks, Mike, and thanks everyone for asking these great questions. I know there's another question which was kind of the same around GenAI, so I hope that I answered that question as well. Perfect. So yeah, I'm going to look at, there are a couple more questions which are coming in. So I'm going to paraphrase this one. So yeah, so there's one more interesting question around RUPA report. So in terms of how much of a lift is still required after scanning with Privado when generating ROPA reports. So yeah, ROPA reports, of course, this is kind of coming from a European audience. If you are operating in Europe, you need to generate Article 30 report or record of processing activity report. The way we do that in Privado is we look at your components and combine them into units. And again, as I showed you for example, Privado accounts API, we extract these processing activities as well. So what we're doing is we are detecting things like data element, data subject, data categories, third parties, cross-border transfer. If I go back to inventory, these databases have location, US East, for example, and also if there are like things like encryption in your code security measures, and that probably fills up about 70% of your ROPA reports. And then things which are still manual are things like legal basis, which generally privacy teams know, a retention schedule at the moment, but these are things that we are planning to automate in Q1. So, I mean, of course, our vision is that we can go and run, scan, connect to your systems and probably generate about 80% of RUPA. And the things which are left are things which privacy teams can fill on themselves. And that's kind of where we are going from a more documentation perspective. And still the effort is going to be way less in Privado because your engineers will understand what you're asking them. And the bulk of the questions which are tough are things like data element, data subject, we automate that. And then it's dynamic. So whenever new data gets created, new data gets collected, new third party gets added, your ROPA reports are updated, which means you have to do it only once. After that, it's always up to date. We will update it without you asking anything. Whenever a change happens, we rescan and re-update it as well. Perfect. So yeah, I think that was the kind of the last question, and we're coming up towards the end of the webinar. So I'm going to stop sharing and if there are any more questions, feel free to ask them. And I'll be happy to answer. But again, thanks everyone for joining in today for the webinar, and appreciate all the questions that you asked. And if there are any more questions, feel free to send those questions across through our website. I'm on LinkedIn as well. Feel free to connect there as well. All right, then. Thanks, everyone.